Well, the Trump riots have hit Brazil as insurrectionists are committing very similar sorts of acts as what we saw on January 6, 2021 in the United States, demanding the return of former President Jair Bolsonaro, who is in Florida having chicken at KFC and walking around a Publix supermarket. I know. We are going to get to all of it. But when we say the actions of Trump and his cronies following the 2020 election, in part due to the lack of consequences that they suffered, will encourage and will normalize the same type of behavior in other places. And that is exactly what we are now seeing in Brazil. The Associated Press reports pro-Bolsonaro rioters storm Brazil's top government offices. We have incredible video of all sorts, and it looks like January 6th. It is a version of January 6th, which we will get to. AP reporting. Supporters of former Brazilian President Bolsonaro, who refused to accept his election defeat, stormed Congress. You could just replace Trump and Trump supporters there. The Supreme Court and the presidential palace on Sunday, a week after the inauguration of his leftist rival, President Lula. Thousands of demonstrators bypassed security barricades, climbed on roofs, smashed windows, and invaded all three buildings, which were believed to be largely vacant on the weekend. Some of the demonstrators called for a military intervention. Wow, where have we heard that before? To either restore the far-right Bolsonaro to power or oust Lula from the presidency. Hours went by before control of the buildings on Brasilia's vast Three Powers Square was reestablished, with hundreds of the participants arrested, and we're going to talk about that as well. In a news conference from Sao Paulo, Lula accused Bolsonaro of encouraging the uprising by those he termed fascist fanatics, and he read a freshly signed decree for the federal government to take control of security in the federal district, saying, quote, "There is no precedent for what they did, and these people need to be punished." Let's take a look at some of the stunning video. Here is one in which you will see, and let's see if I can get the volume right. Keep the volume lower. In this one, you see folks who have gotten through the police barricade. You quite literally see the fencing there down on the ground, invaded the Congress ramp. They threatened to occupy the chamber and the Senate, which they subsequently did. These videos, different setting, different weather, that's for sure, but looking very, very much like January 6th here in the United States. In another video, continuing to look just like what we saw on January 6th, the Bolsonaristas invaded the floor of the federal Senate, and they're wearing different clothes. You don't see the QAnon shaman, but you see a very, very similar looking event as to what we saw on January 6th in the House of Representatives. Yeah. The imagery, as we continue looking, here is more imagery where you will see, and I'm trying to get the audio mix just right so you can hear me. This looks like January 6th. They have flags. They approach police. They knock down the barriers. In this case, police take out some kind of an irritant spray, it appears. But the rioters overwhelm the police in the sense that they break the barrier and they continue moving on into the buildings. Where have we seen this before? I mean, it is just another example of the same thing again. Now, it is really important to understand not only, how can I say this? In a general sense, we know where they got this idea. We know where they got this idea because we saw it here on January 6, 2021. It's been 2 years and 3 days since that took place. But it's also important to understand that Bannon, Steve Bannon, and other Trump aides were advising Jair Bolsonaro in November about how to proceed. This is an article I have on the screen from the Washington Post. The date is November 23rd, and we're going to deal with this in more detail a little bit later. Trump aides Bannon Miller advising the Bolsonaros on next steps. Next steps, what do you mean? Well, instigate a riot, an insurrection. Some allies and advisors, writes the article, want the Brazilian president to contest his election loss to Lula. Others want a global fight over free speech. And you can read this, and we're going to look at it a little bit more later, so I won't delve into it that much right now. But this is the playbook. They helped them develop the playbook. And we should not be surprised when the same inputs give you very similar outputs. Now, what is necessary here is for the military to say that they unconditionally support Lula as the legally elected president. And you all know I absolutely despise Bolsonaro, and I'm not a big fan of Lula. I've told you my issues with Lula before. I think Lula is better than Bolsonaro, but that's a separate question from who is the legally elected president. And the legally elected president is Lula. So the military, and maybe by the time we go to air with this, it will have happened. I don't know. If it has, as of right now, it hasn't happened, which is why I'm saying it. The military should say, Lula's the legal president. Don't come to us for any sort of ideas about a coup or help with the insurrection. Lula's the president, period. Now, unfortunately, there are many in the Brazilian military who are very much anti-Lula. And when you know that that's the case, until you hear that unconditional statement of support, you wonder whether it's actually coming. This is in part what happens when the people who tried this here weren't seriously punished. And by that, I mean the instigators and the agitators. I know QAnon shaman got 4 years or whatever. I get it. But big picture, all the way up to Trump, the people who created this environment and stimulated exactly what went down, they have not been punished. So this is what happens. One difference, arguably, that we're already seeing is that the mass arrests have started in Brazil. Now, are they fully capturing all the lawbreakers yet? We don't know. But scores have already been arrested after they showed up and they did the things that I showed them doing on video. And while there were, of course, eventually hundreds of arrests here in the United States, at the immediate time, there was not that show of, we're arresting all of you and throwing you all on a bus. And quite literally, that's what's been happening with a lot of these rioters who, quite frankly, are terrorists in Brazil. And so that's a difference. We'll see if we get a statement from the military, and we'll see where this ultimately shakes out. Now, in the midst of all this, you might be wondering, David, where is Jair Bolsonaro? Well, he's in Florida, eating chicken at KFC and looking around at a Publix, and that is exactly what I want to talk about next. Did you know that half of Americans are deficient in vitamin A, vitamin C, and magnesium? Most Americans are deficient in vitamin D. I take vitamin D during the winter. It is sometimes difficult to eat exactly the right amount of each food to get exactly what you need. I just make my life simpler with AG1 by Athletic Greens. In the morning, 1 scoop of AG1. I get the entire day's worth of 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, and whole food sourced ingredients. It's what I want. It's no more. It's no less. It's not making any outlandish claims. It's just an easy, sustainable routine. I've tried different ways of taking vitamins. AG1 is cheaper. It's quicker. It's tastier. I'm not fumbling around with different capsules. It tastes great to drink straight with water. Sometimes I'll put it in a smoothie or shake. It's simple. It's something easy you can do going into the new year, staying properly nourished. Athletic Greens is giving my audience a free year's supply of vitamin D. I take that every day in winter. Plus, you'll get 5 free travel packs of AG1. Go to athleticgreens.com/Pacman. The link is down below.